And we are live on YouTube, and I will now let everybody in. Good evening, everybody. If you're just joining us, this is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. If you're just joining us, this is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Welcome, everybody.
Matt, could you open up the chat to everyone, please?
All right, let's get started. Good evening, everybody. My name is Matt Losack. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. Uh, we're just done with the Maryland General Assembly's 2025 session. And I think my quote to Maryland Matters, which has not come out yet, was that there were no winners, there were only survivors. So we'll see whether or not that gets in print. But tonight we're going to discuss the successes and failures of the session, what took place, and what we need to do to prepare for next year. With me, of course, is our staff, Emily Towie and Tim Huang, Melek Demir, and David Mullins, our outreach director, who's also juggling children tonight. And Max Wilberg, who's with the Governor Wes Moore's service year, who's been with us this year and will stay with us until early summer. And of course, our treasurer, Josh Fisher, who makes sure that we're using the money the way it's supposed to be used. And our special guest tonight is the majority leader for the Maryland General Assembly from our very own District 20 here in Montgomery County. David Moon has been at this for quite some time and is an experienced legislator and political activist, and has worked with, I think, just about every leading elected official, at least on the Democratic side, in the state of Maryland. And so we're very honored and pleased to have with us David Moon, and to hear his views on the Maryland General Assembly in general and any perspective he might have relevant to the renter community, especially since so many of us are seeing such a great deal of stress in terms of housing instability and what's going on at the federal level that is impacting that as well as at the state level. David, welcome.
Welcome, and thanks for having me. So let me just start by saying, this was my 11th year in the House of Delegates, and this was easily the worst session we've had in 11 years. We started the year with a $3 billion deficit, and so we knew our aspirations were going to be limited, but we were not expecting that in the first 3 months of the Trump administration, he was going to add hundreds of millions, if not billions, to our deficit. And that's where we are now. So we did the best that we could to manage the fiscal situation, which, again, every day this administration is in office, they knock another few hundred jobs out of Marylanders' hands and send them into our unemployment insurance rolls, which are literally doubling right now every week or so. So there's a world of pain. And with that, I say that just to say those things that require cash, as many housing and renters issues do, faced a huge uphill battle. And I want to say, if it makes you feel any better, and it shouldn't, the same situation befell us across the board. Our environmental priorities, the Trump administration pulled hundreds of millions of funding out from under us, and so everything is constrained. So I'll start with one example of how this played out. Uh, we were able to maintain access to lawyers for those facing eviction, but the pot of funding for the coming year got cut in half. So it's still millions available, but it's half the millions that were available last year. And housing production activities and direct subsidies, likewise, everything was capped if we could, and certainly nothing was getting increased given the fiscal realities we're facing right now. I'll just very briefly touch upon Just Cause, since I know that's probably the biggest question. I'll say once again, I'm only speaking for the House here. I cannot divine anyone else's intentions or details, so I'm not going to speak on behalf of anyone else. But the House passed. We're not calling it Just Cause anymore. We've rebranded it into Good Cause eviction protections, but we passed it in the past. We were ready to receive it again this year. We told the Senate we were ready to receive it and move on with it. And the bill, unfortunately, came back with a separate policy discussion on rent stabilization practices throughout this. They were trying to attach a statewide rent stabilization discussion. And so let me just pause there um, and just reflect on that for a few moments. So number one, we work very well with our Senate partners. So I really am going to hesitate to demonize or cast negative light on what they're doing. I actually think they have good and different intentions with respect to housing policy. And so they were attempting to address a situation where many of us actually are concerned about creating new housing production in Maryland and have put that as a priority. And so the Senate is asking questions about, I gather, the recent Montgomery County rent stabilization policy, as well as anything else that exists in the state. And so I would suggest that they have an honest policy discussion that they're trying to raise, but the fact of them putting it onto the Good Cause bill probably indicates that the Senate is not ready to pass a clean Good Cause bill. And so, in other words, they've presented us with a bargain or a compromise, right? We don't want Good Cause straight up. So if you really want it, here's what you have to eat to get this out of the Senate. So that's how I read the play of what's been put before us this year. And again, I'm not going to cast aspersions on my teammates here, because I know they've all worked on this issue. And oftentimes, the chairs of the standing committees are not working on their own views. They are working at the direction of other people's views. And this happens all the time in the House and the Senate. You know, it's the views of the body and the presiding officers that come into play here. So, not having been in the room, I can divine nothing other than what I see before me, which is that they're not ready to pass it clean. So that's where we are. They've left a bargain. Everyone who has a stake in housing policy can decide whether that bargain is worth it for them. And other than that, I'll say, we'll have to be back at this next year. And again, on many of these big policies, some of them do take many years, as we see sometimes the hard way. So I'll leave that there, and just a few other highlights, because we did have quite a number of hot floor discussions about housing and renters policy. And what that should tell you, again, is that every bill that comes before the legislature that deals with landlord and tenant dynamics faces a tough time. Many lawmakers own properties that they rent. I'm actually myself in this category, so I don't legislate from that perspective. To be clear. But you could imagine how that plays out across 141 House members and 47 senators who all have feelings on it. So a few other highlights. We had a big debate about eviction scheduling and processes in order to give people time to get their things out before it gets trashed on the sidewalk. It got really watered down, and what came out of it was at least a 6-day notice before a scheduled eviction date. We also had legislation passed that gives 24 hours notice before landlords can enter tenant property. We also had a huge debate about squatters, and where that landed was on some middle of the road policies that basically the judges have agreed to expedite having court hearings when there's a debate about whether someone is a squatter who broke in or whether they are in fact a tenant who is attempting to exercise their tenant rights under Maryland law. As I noted, we also were able to maintain eviction lawyers for those facing eviction, but it was cut down to $5 million versus the prior year. We also had a huge discussion about mold remediation and ended up coming up with statewide policies, but it landed on a 60-day window for landlords to inspect and remediate mold instances. And we also had a bill passed that capped late fees at 5% of the unpaid portion of rent, not the entirety of the amount that was due, because unfortunately some people were attempting to do that. So that's a bit of the top lines. If the chat box is open, I will punch links to the bills into the chat so that folks who want to read more detail about what these rules look like can do so. And one last thing I will say, because I know this is always in a hot debate in Maryland, and I may actually be on the other side of some of the Renters Alliance on this one, but housing production continues to be something I think we need to keep pushing forward on. And unfortunately, from where I sit, it's rich single-family homeowners who often, and actually rich or not rich, but many single-family homeowners don't want other types of housing built near them because they think it diminishes their property values or the aesthetic of their neighborhood. But I do think we have no choice but to keep building more housing. And unfortunately, some of those measures stalled in Montgomery County and in other counties. And the governor had some proposals to try and force counties to build more housing by issuing some targets for every county to strive to hit. But that bill died. So even our Democratic governor under a Democratic controlled legislature was not able to push through efforts to force more housing to be built. As we know through these discussions, it gets into a very local discussion that gets people having very mixed feelings about what that change might look like. And it's a fair discussion to have. But again, I happen to fall on the side of we need more housing production. And we unfortunately did not make big strides on that this year in Assembly. So on that good cause and many other issues, we will be back to work for you. And again, I will drop some links to bills that passed in the comment box.
Thank you, Delegate Moon. Let me just comment, since you referenced the Renters Alliance, you might be on the different side of this. You're not, as far as we could tell, but let me untangle a couple things. One, first of all, we don't take a position on to build more housing or not to build more housing. The Renters Alliance is more interested in what happens to people when they rent their homes. And so the issue of NIMBY and YIMBY, that is not in my backyard or yes in my backyard, is a housing production discussion that we urge everybody to have. One of the things that we do object to, however, is this notion that building more housing is a substitute for renter protections. That is something we oppose. And I believe, Delegate Moon, you oppose that too. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Then you know what? We are square on the same page. I love it.
Very good. But here's another wrinkle in the discussion, which I know you have to reference as a leader in the Maryland General Assembly. But this narrative that has popped up frequently, pushed by the landlord developer industry and their blog lobbyists and so on, friendly bloggers and so on, is that somehow renter protections are an obstacle to investment in new housing. And that sounds good on the face of it, but basically the industry is saying if you provide regulations that protect renters in their homes, that we're not going to build new homes, we won't make a profit. And the data shows otherwise. The fact is, Montgomery County, Washington, D.C., New York, San Francisco, and other areas around the country, which are high economic hubs in this country, have high demand for housing. And where there is high demand, you have customers. And if you look at the data about building, you will find that building continues at a hurried pace wherever it can in these high demand regions. We understand that the industry might not like not making as much money as they possibly could, but they are certainly very profitable. In places like Tacoma Park, Delegate Moon's home, they're often referenced by bloggers and everybody, oh, look, they're not building because they have rent stabilization there. Well, as Delegate Moon referenced, there's a lot of houses there now that didn't exist 50 years ago, and there's not a whole lot of cheap available land. And, so we suggested perhaps they start tearing down the people's houses in Tacoma Park to make more land. So I don't make more available land, and that's not going to happen. So what is known is that Tacoma Park is built out, and where there are spaces, there's discussions about investment, there's discussions about renovating or tearing down and building housing in the existing multi-housing that is in Tacoma Park, and of course also repurposing Adventist Hospital into a multi-family, multi-residential apartment community. So they're investing wherever they can invest. It's not a matter of whether or not there's rent stabilization or protection, just cause protection, or what have you. It's a matter of whether or not in these high demand regions, interest rates, available land, zoning laws have come into play to allow for that investment. And we've seen a lot of data on this. And again, we show in highly regulated areas that protect renters that building continues unabated. So, and if it doesn't, it's usually for other reasons, not because of these simple protections. I also wanted to point out, Delegate Moon, that sadly, the failure to pass good cause on the Senate, the House of Delegates passed it last year 96-37. Thank you very much. But the Senate stalled it again in the Judicial Proceedings Committee, and we will have something to say about that down the road. But we feel that it would not have cost Maryland anything. In a budget that's $3 billion in the hole or struggling, and perhaps, Delegate Moon, you can mention something about the budget. This legislation would have done nothing except offer local municipalities the opportunity to pass good cause protection, and it would not have cost anything. So, except now the failure to pass it is going to cost at least 5,000 a year of people who are evicted for tenant holding over. And it is a tremendous tragedy at a time where we're seeing terrible pressure from the federal government on working and low-income families. So, David, did you want to say something about the overall budget situation, so just for a reality check in terms of human services and the other impacts we might see from what's happening in the state?
Yeah, we're in real trouble. I'm not gonna sugarcoat this. The so we had a $3 billion deficit at the start of session. Within weeks, the Trump and just from the direct federal job losses, our analysts projected we had to come up with another $500 million. Um, and that was in the first few weeks of the Trump administration. They did not count in there all of the private sector job losses. And just by way of example, one agency, USAID, once they started messing with USAID, in the first few weeks, that triggered 1,200 private sector contractor job losses in Montgomery County and Prince George's County. These were people who were servicing USAID contracts. And then weeks later, Johns Hopkins announced 1,000 or 2,000 private sector job losses in Baltimore from people servicing research grants on behalf of USAID. That's one agency triggered. That's by back of the napkin math had to be at least 3,500 or 4,000 job losses just from the first wave of attacks. If you start multiplying that across NIH, NOAA, FDA, NIST, NASA, and the like, all of which are in Maryland, it's real trouble. So I actually think it's going to be into the billions that our budget numbers are off. And so, I think that just raises the odds that we're back in for deep cutting. And if you want to know how we dealt with the $3.5 billion of deficit, 2 billion of it was cuts. So, that's why you see things like access to renters lawyers getting cut, and many, many other things got cut this year. We tried not to touch things like Medicaid and disability services, foster youth, really those who need our help the most. But the Trump administration has very clearly indicated they're coming after those very things next. So wish us luck. We did our best, but I do think we're going to be in for ongoing months, if not at least 2 years of sacrifice. Frankly, it'll be sacrifice on behalf of all of us.
Well, perhaps there'll be some human sacrifice south of the border. What was the cut for the right to counsel
It was 5 million got cut.
from the 14?
Yeah, I actually think it went down to 5. Let me double check my math on that, but I think the final number was it went down to 5 million. But don't quote me on it. I will email you back. I have to dig through the budget stack to actually see the specific line item. And that's one that I recall it got changed on the last day or two of session. So
So,
I'll email you back the exact, but I think it went down to 5. But
so
but
just
again, I'll verify that.
just to rub salt in the wound then. So we have no good cause protection, making it easy to evict somebody from their home, but we are allowing some of your belongings to be put in storage, which now the storage units are going to profit immensely because more and more people are going to be evicted. And of course, the lawyer that we thought you might have in this terribly imbalanced relationship between landlords and the tenants is now going to be further imbalanced because we won't be able to get a lawyer except in the most egregious cases for a handful of people.
I mean, that's one way of putting it. Yeah, like I said, the other way I would put it is um, we were able to save some funding for legal services.
Right.
I know that's not the rosy way to look at it. And the fiscal stuff, there was not going to be a set of winners this year on anything.
Mhm.
And I unfortunately am predicting that so long as the Trump administration is doing what it's doing to the not just the federal budget, but the direct assault on the Maryland workforce. Ours is a federal workforce for good or for bad. Um, we need some check and balance here. At the start of the year, I would have said we take back the House, we're in business, because then we can check the budget with the House. But what they're doing with the executive branch right now is not anything that Congress is approving or checking at all. And so it'll be something, but it won't be quite the solution that I thought it would be. So hang in there. We're all we're all going to be having to stick with one another for until Trump is gone, really.
Mhm. Well, and that's not necessarily a guarantee of a complete shift either. We'll have to see how this goes. But we're in difficult times, to say the least. And if you thought that what goes on at the federal level has no impact on the local level, then you were sadly mistaken. Have you had an opportunity to speak with the governor and in a way that you can relate to us?
No, unfortunately not. And I'm on. I'm. He was a little salty that we didn't pass his housing production legislation, and he indicated as much in his sine die statement. But believe it or not, some of them were on his side trying to get that thing through. So I continue to think with everything that's going on at the federal level, we are all going to do our best, locking arms, despite any policy differences, as we confront Maryland confronts the Trump administration. Frankly, so so whatever differences I have with the Senate or the governor at the moment are real tiny compared
Yeah.
to what's going on between us and Trump, and frankly, with us and Hogan, who is waiting in the wings um, to replace Governor Moore. So as far as I'm concerned, um, this is our family, and this is a family discussion, and we're gonna sort this out.
Well, as we take no position on candidates for any office or any political party, but when it comes to policy, we are certainly concerned about where nearly 40% of the state is going to live if they are either priced out or evicted without cause. And especially since that 40% or slightly less than 40% includes our middle working, low income families, whoever's left in our immigrant communities. And David, we're finding more and more that a lot of those people are going to be senior citizens who are extremely vulnerable. And we are getting calls, every day from folks who are going to us who moved into a rental home when they were 72 and now they're 85 and they have nowhere to go. They don't know what they're going to do, and the prospect of moving is absolutely overwhelming to them. It is causing them health problems, mental problems, and is really becoming a incredible, visible disaster for us. We saw a gentleman who was an amputee of both of his legs and one of his arms, and on a pacemaker, and well over 65 years old, who was evicted for tenant holding over just a few weeks ago, and is now in a men's shelter, and facing absolute disaster. That's just one case. We're seeing this all around. And now add this layer of, I forgot what the number was, David, I'm sure you know, at least 2,000 federal workers in Montgomery County who have lost their jobs. And while they might have some savings now, 6 months down the road, they may not. And not all federal workers make a lot of money. Some of them only, make just enough to get by in Montgomery County, and so they are going to be particularly vulnerable as well.
Yeah, it's not a good situation. We've actually been flagged by Moody's, the bond rating agencies, as being, I think, the most exposed state of all of the states in terms of our federal exposure. And I try to tell people too. I've been tracking all of it in real time through Google News alerts. And every time the Republicans would jump up on the floor, I think when this started, they thought this was a Montgomery and Prince George's problem. And then they started to see Park Service cuts at Assateague, and up at the C&O Canal in Cumberland. FEMA stopped funding wildfire training out in Frederick County. Social Security cops up at Woodlawn in Baltimore County. They're not paying farmers in Harford County for solar that they already installed on their land. On and on and on. I could just I keep rattling all of these off. And it does put us in the situation where, even if we could count on winning back control of the federal government in the next couple cycles, I I think we would be wise to move Maryland into a mode of self-reliance, um, as best we can, and really do try and diversify our industries as best we can. I'm just not convinced that all of this chaos and nonsense dies with Trump, as opposed to him having ignited a wing or movement within his party. So I'm certainly planning on remaining vigilant as we face this down.
Well, that's an important segue, Delegate Moon, because I was just going to ask you, what should we be doing? So obviously, for the long term, diversifying our economic base so that we're not vulnerable then to any one basket of eggs. But what else should we be doing to prepare for what's happening now at the federal level, and also to protect ourselves toward the next Maryland General Assembly?
Ha. Well, I forget you guys are not a partisan organization. I'm a partisan. I'm the Democratic House
You can say what you
um,
want, Delegate
majority
Moon.
leader.
We have to
So,
be a little bit
hey,
limited.
this is just a nonpartisan call to civic engagement on the next election cycle. This is where voters have a chance to make their mark. I know there's been very little way to discern how people feel about these radical changes that they are enacting. But when we had special elections in Wisconsin and Florida, that certainly uh, gave some opportunity for people to read a referendum in that. And we'll soon have off-year state elections nearby in Virginia that everybody is going to be paying very close attention to for tea leaves. But that's, all on the civic engagement front. But outside of that, as I've noted, if you're thinking particularly to good cause, I think you have additional minds to move in the Senate, and I would be thinking about the wide body of the Senate, not just the leadership, because oftentimes the leadership is reflecting where they think their caucus is. And one thing I've noted is that we've had it because of the number of vacancies lately. We actually have had quite a number of new delegates and new senators. But in the Senate, the numbers are so small, both on each committee and in the whole body, that little swings of a few members can make a huge difference. I would suggest to you that some of us have been monitoring end of life options, for example, and that I could very clearly say the fate of that legislation changed with the last few senators that were just appointed um, during this General Assembly session. And so, again, as it comes to good cause, the numbers are small on every committee. And so, just a couple of people expressing discomfort with something can go a long way to causing problems. And so, again, I would just suggest to you there have been many changes in the assembly this year And it's not a bad idea to double back on rank and file members to shore up education and where folks are at. Again, it's very hard to read the good cause play that we saw this year, where we had rent stabilization reforms attached to it. Again, the rent stabilization is this whole separate conversation, whatever you think about that. But the message is clear to me that if they stick that whole other conversation onto this one, as I said from the jump, they're not ready to pass that thing clean. So we've got, 8 months or so to circle back with, and really it's circling back with you're nonpartisan, so you hit everybody. But in reality, the bulk of the yes votes are going to come from my party's side of the aisle, and it wouldn't be bad to circle back with the rank and file.
Well, we know where the cleavage goes in terms of Republicans and Democrats on this issue. But just so people understand the two amendment baskets that were pushed on this. One was there was an insistence by the landlord developer community and their allies to add vacancy decontrol to the good cause bill. Vacancy right now, rent stabilization programs certainly in Montgomery County and perhaps in Prince George's and elsewhere where they have been put in place in the last couple of years, maintain that the apartment that is stabilized will remain stabilized whether somebody moves out or not. Vacancy decontrol, which is what the landlords want, is that when somebody moves out, the market then can go to the apartment can go to market rate. And the belief from the affordable housing advocates is that every time that happens, we lose one more affordable home to the market, and that it becomes unaffordable for people in Maryland. So that was one amendment that we strongly opposed, as did most everybody who supports good cause in the state. And we also think that it created a false choice, since the legislation had nothing to do with that, but they attached it to it like a barnacle. And then the other part was that they were knocking out the language that would have established just cause or good causes as serious reasons to evict somebody, instead making them a little bit more open to pretty much everything that you can think of to evict somebody, and then codifying that, which would have been the opposite intent of good cause, which intends to make sure that, first of all, you have a stated reason to evict somebody, and that it's a justifiable reason to evict somebody. Right now, with 60 days notice, a landlord only has to say that they want to take the apartment home back. They don't have to state a reason why. And we are seeing all kinds of retaliation and abuse of tenants pursuing promised or required services, forming tenants associations, or racial discrimination and other source of income discrimination. So it really is a loophole that creates a lot of injustice in our state. Delegate Moon, is there any last words? We know that you are exhausted, as you should be, for serving us mightily as you did. Would you like to say anything before you go back to bed?
No, I will only leave you with a final link, which is to the full digest of bills touching renters and the like, and you can peruse it at your leisure. If the bill on the list is in a highlighted color, that means it is one that passed. And with that, thanks for having me on, and have a good rest of your discussion.
Thank you, Delegate Moon, the majority leader and our very own District 20 state delegate. Thank you very much. Okay, with that, I think Zephyr Shaw from the Maryland Legal Aid is not with us. We had hoped he would join us this evening. So he must have had some kind of delay. He might even be in court or dealing with a tenant who is facing eviction. So we'll have him back another time. In the meantime, we'll move right on to just some general information on landlord-tenant resources.
Oh, Matt,
Emily, Tim, sorry.
there were a couple questions for
Oh, well, by
Delegate
all
Moon. I'm not
means.
sure if Delegate Moon is able to stick around for a little bit more,
Delegate
but there
Moon, do you have a
were
minute to answer any questions?
I could take a question or two.
One or two. Tim, go
okay.
ahead, lead us.
Okay, there's one that was that said that they came in late, so they don't know if it was addressed, but what can be done differently next year to help good cause get accepted?
Yeah, that one I'll just reiterate. It's hard to tell, but the best start would be to circle back with senators on the Judicial Proceedings Committee, where I believe this bill has primary jurisdiction. And again, I just think that it's good practice, given that there's new members across the board, to hit, and some of them very new. Like we had people just go over to the Senate a few weeks ago. So appointments were happening constantly during session. I really think starting with the newest senators, it would be good practice to start from scratch with education on the purpose of the Good Cause Bill.
Okay, thank you. And then there was more of a comment, which was, thank you, Delegate Moon, for championing more housing and zoning reform. I think that's all the questions.
Great. Well, thanks. This is obviously I mean, housing is something, it ought to be a right. It's not a right, but it's something that all of us need. So thanks for really keeping an eye on this.
And we thank you, Delegate Moon, again, and please get some rest. And if you have some time, Delegate Moon, I'd love to get together with you to get into the weeds on some of your strategies and your genius on these issues. All right, with that, I think Zephyr Shaw might be with us in a moment.
Oh, Matt.
But if he is not, let's begin on the some of the resources that are available to tenants, and we'll move that up on the agenda. Emily and Tim, do you want to take a lead on that?
Sure. For real quick, Matt, there was a question in the chat, not for the delegate, but about 24-hour notice. When a landlord wants to enter your apartment and gives you 24-hour notice, should they also give you a time span for when they will enter?
I think that you're entitled to ask for one. The law, I believe, says you have to get 24-hour notice. But I think that the law also contemplates, and we're not lawyers, but we've been doing this for a while, that you can make a case for it's inconvenient and say, hey, look, unless it's an emergency, I want to be in the apartment when you come, for example. So can we do this Thursday instead of Wednesday? Or, I'm working, but I'm working from home, but my lunch break is between 11 and it could be 11 to 2. Can you make it that time? I think that you could make that case, but you should make it in writing because ultimately, if you say, you may have given me 24 hours, but I'm not letting you in, you will be in breach of lease. And a landlord could pursue an eviction on that basis. So a landlord does have a right to enter your apartment to do something legitimate like inspect or do maintenance with a 24-hour notice or longer. But they also cannot come into your apartment even with that notice if you say no. It's your private space, but you could be in breach of lease. So let me make that clear. They can't barge into your apartment unless it's an emergency. A broken pipe, fire, God forbid, something like that. If it's an emergency, then any judge would say, yeah, that was an emergency, then they can just come right in. But lacking an emergency, it's your private space. They should knock on the door. And if you let them in, you let them in. If you say you can't come in, they cannot come in. If they did, they would be trespassing. You should call the police. However, if they've given you a 24 hours notice and you've got no good reason not to let them in, then you should let them in.
Thanks, Matt. And then I don't know if we know this. One of the bills that Delegate Moon shared in the chat that was passed this session, was about notice of landlord entry, requiring that the landlord gives a tenant's written notice at least 24 hours in advance before entering. but I know that was already Montgomery County law. Was that not state law before? Is that what the distinction is, or do we not know?
I'm not sure. Can you repeat the question again, Emily?
Yeah, so we always tell people that the landlord has to give them at least 24 hours notice, but one of the bills that Delegate Moon just shared that passed in the session was that landlords have to give 24 hours notice. So was that not, that was just a Montgomery County provision before?
It may have been, that I'm not sure of. I believe it was state law, but it may
That's
be, I'm not sure, but for everybody here, hopefully from Montgomery County, it's 24 hours notice. And if they're coming from the county to do an inspection, a county investigator, like they're doing a 10%, 50%, or 100% inspection of your building, they usually give 72 hours notice at least.
right.
And they will send a postcard or something to let you know that they're coming. But you can schedule, absent an emergency or something where there's a justifiable inability for the property management to schedule precisely. For example, they're doing a building-wide extermination, and they're doing it floor by floor. So they say it's happening Monday through Friday, and the extermination company is going to be there for that week. You can't, it's difficult for you to say, look, you can't come into my place that week, I'm on vacation. They, hopefully they will have given enough notice so that if you can't be there and you want somebody there, you can get a friend to come over or something. But the entire building or a contractor can't be hung up because of one tenant saying, look, that's inconvenient for me. So it has to be something reasonable.
Okay, thank you. So to transition from that, talk about some of the resources. I'll start with landlord-tenant affairs. So, if you're having, like I'm seeing some people right now in the chat talking about different issues they're having with their landlord. Um, if you're having a lease issue, a ledger issue, abuse from management, things like that, you should first like try to resolve it with them. Like let's say you're seeing late fees on your ledger every month, even though you have your receipt from you paying your rent on the first of the month. You should first try to go talk to management and see if you guys can resolve that. Bring whatever documentation you have, see if they can make the adjustment. If they're unwilling or unable or they're like disputing what you're saying, you can then escalate it by filing a complaint with the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs, which is housed under the Department of Housing. And Tim just put the link in the chat. You can also call, if like you're not computer savvy, you could also call 311 and just ask to speak to Landlord Tenant Affairs, but we recommend that you use the online link because you can like download a copy of your form to keep for your records, and you're also welcome to reach out to us to forward your complaint to us, or let us know if you want to know if you think that if this is complaint worthy or not. Do you have a right to complain about this? That's something that we can help advise you on. Tim, you want to do code?
Yes. Sorry, I was typing. So Emily talked about Ulta, which is the lease side, and then there's the other side, which is the your structural and physical condition side of the complaint process. So if you have something that is broken in your units, like your fridge, maybe there's a leak, there's mold, things like that, you can call code enforcement using the site that Emily linked, or not call, but you can go make a complaint using the site there, or you can call 311 for code or Ulta. 311 is just a general number that will, in Montgomery County, that will direct you to the right agency, and you can make a complaint there. Now, keep in mind that not everything is a code issue, or not everything that is like a what you would call broken is a code issue. For example, like if let's say your carpet is really old. As far as I know, I think in Montgomery County, there's no law that says they have to replace your carpet, unless it's like you're tripping on it. There's like rips or whatever on it. But take that as an example where even though something might not seem in good condition to you, it might not be a code issue. But if you want us to take a look at it, if you want us to help you with your to walk you through the process, we're happy to do that. Just reach out to us. I think we linked our email, which is info@rentersalliance.org. We also have a number you can call us at, and we can help you with that. And keep in mind that also the code enforcement is the 311 number is only for residents of Montgomery County and not the incorporated cities. So Tacoma Park, Gettysburg, and Rockville have their own code enforcement, or actually Tacoma Park uses the county, but Rockville and Gettysburg has their own code enforcement. So you would have to go through them. But we would, the process is very similar. We'd be also happy to work with you through that as well. Did I miss anything? I think that was it, right?
I'll just add one thing, Tim, for a third resource for complaints that don't have to do with the maintenance and conditioning unit and don't have to do with like with the landlord necessarily in your ledger, would be going to the Office of Rent Stabilization, the new office that handles rent stabilization and the allowable and non-allowable fees under that program. So, and I'm just about to, someone in the chat just had a question about they signed their lease at a previous rental rate and told there was a new price. They want to know if they should pay that. So landlords have to give you 90 days notice of any rent increase, and there can only be one in a 12-month period. So if like you rent there for 1 year, you should only get one rent increase. You can't get one in January and then one in March and one in October. So if your landlord, if all of a sudden like your portal is now telling you 2,000 instead of 1,800, and you never got the 90 days notice, that's not an allowable rent increase. So same process, you can call 311 and ask to speak to the Office of Rent Stabilization to file a complaint with them and have them look into that. Again, not 90 days is like the magic number for rent increases. And I don't, and I think, and I'll put the email in the chat. So for rent stabilization, they don't have a complaint form the way that the code enforcement department and landlord tenant does. They have an email. So because they're a new office, so you can either email, put the email chat or call 311. And I think our special guest is here, so I'll turn it back to Matt.
Yes, he's getting ready. Thank you for coming, Zephyr Shaw. I'll be with you in just a moment. There he is, looking hectic, coming from court and meetings and every tenant in the state of Maryland seeking his assistance. Hang on one sec. I'm going to put in the chat a link from a press release that came out today. We put it in our newsletter about rent stabilization. And I want to make sure that Montgomery County residents who are protected by it understand what the latest increase allowance is and which fees are also allowed. So I'm going to put that press release in the chat. And also I just want to mention, which will be a good segue to Zephyr Shaw, that we also are a partner in the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. And that one of our partners in that is Maryland Legal Aid, as well as Casa de Maryland, which have lawyers to assist those who are eligible, usually at 50% of area median income, that is low-income tenants facing eviction who need attorneys. And if you find yourself in that situation, you can reach out to us. We'll guide you in that direction. You can also call, I think, 211, who will connect you. But it's the Maryland Legal Aid Bureau and CASA, which have lawyers in Montgomery County to assist low-income tenants who need protection from eviction in court. We urge you to take advantage of that program. And we are doing our best to get information about that program out to tenants. And we are also going door to door to tenants who are listed on the court dockets facing eviction. So with that is our good friend and ally and someone who's been working on landlord-tenant issues for as long as we have, and is an expert on rental housing law, and is the assistant director at the Maryland Legal Aid Bureau for Housing Justice, I believe, if I got that right. And if not, it sounds good anyway. But we certainly welcome our friend Zephyr Shaw, who has also been coordinating for us and for Renters United Maryland, which we are a co-founder of, the legislative docket for the 2025 Maryland General Assembly. I believe this is several years that we've been doing this. And Zephyr, I gave you co-host status so you could share your screen if you want to. Go through it and let's look at some of the specific legislation that succeeded and failed. And we did have Majority Leader David Moon with us earlier, who went through some of it. And you can go back and see, we could talk about what he said on good cause later. But by all means, walk us through.
Yeah.
Welcome, Zephyr
Well,
Shop.
thank you very much, Matt, and everyone at Montgomery County Renters Alliance. We really appreciate partnership with your organization, appreciate all the work that you all have done, not just during session, but all year round. I'm trying to be brief, although I tend to get a little too nuanced, and just tell me, Matt, whoever, if I should fast forward a little bit on some of these topics. So I'll share my screen right here. And yeah, as Matt was saying, I'm at Maryland Legal Aid. My title is actually Advocacy Director for Human Right to Housing. But Matt and I, we were in 2018 in the room to co-found Renters United Maryland, and Maryland Legal Aid continues to be a partner in the statewide legislative coalition that is Renters United Maryland. And just give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen. Okay, great. So this is an end of session recap. It was another session chock full of bills related to housing and to tenants' rights. 34 bills in the House, 18 bills in the Senate. That's inclusive of some cross-filed bills, but many of them were not cross-filed. As you can see here, some of the top line priorities for legal aid and for the coalitions around the tenants' rights were good cause eviction, the Tenant Protection Recovery Act, eviction prevention funding in the budget, and right to counsel funding. I'm going to go into everything, but I wanted to highlight those things as key priorities. Now, the theme of the session, this played out from probably mid-January all the way through the last week of session. The theme was, as legislators and as the governor and as other partners in this work might share, there's very little affordable housing supply. The governor's been saying there's over 96,000 units deficit in affordable housing in the state. It's probably that's a pretty conservative number. And at the same time, especially in the Senate, legislators made the point that they've done a lot around renter protections, particularly since 2020. And they feel they've potentially done too much for renters. And that segs to their other point, which is the same point that the multifamily industry lobby is bringing up, the affordable housing developer lobby is bringing up, and conservative legislators are bringing up, which is landlords and investors and developers don't like the regulatory environment in Maryland. And renters and renter protections are a big part of what they don't like about the state. And they'll take their ball and they'll go to Pennsylvania or Virginia if the legislature continues to do what those progressive renters' rights people keep asking them to do. So that wasn't like a warning shot. That was a emphatic theme in almost every priority bill throughout session. So let's talk about those priorities. So in the charts that are coming up here, a red thumbs down means the bill didn't pass. A green thumbs up means the bill passed. And then we'll get to that blue one in the corner in a second. But as Matt has covered, and probably Delegate Moon, good cause eviction didn't pass. It didn't get a vote. After last year coming through the House for the first time in many, many years of trying, we thought that the bill had a good chance in the Senate. It turns out that there was a interesting alignment of interests against the bill. And those interests were at the top of them all, that the Senate president did not like this bill. Senate president was not going to like this bill unless it had a quid pro quo in it, which was, on one hand, giving us the removal of preemption on counties from passing good cause eviction legislation at the local level, and on the other, preempting those same counties from maintaining or enforcing vacancy control rent stabilization in those jurisdictions. So basically, you can have good cause, but not good cause and vacancy control. Pick one and be happy. And that was, it turned out, we didn't really know that until later in session, but that was the hard line, like the line in the sand, as his staff called it. It was also our as just like a collective advocacy community. That was also our line in the sand. Like we were not going to sacrifice Prince George's County and Montgomery County's hard work to win vacancy control rent stabilization in order to get an opt-in good cause eviction law. Not to belabor the point, but the Senate JPR did not include advocates in the amendment process. They had a room full of adversaries of ours to come up with over 15 different amendments, including that quid pro quo amendment. We were called in the last minute just to get, whether to see if they could get our blessing on that. We never negotiated. We were never asked to negotiate. We just told them we're not going to accept that preemption of vacancy control. We asked them if they would do something differently, if they had thoughts on how to accomplish the Senate president's prerogatives without preemption on vacancy control. The answer was no. And so that bill did not get out of committee. It didn't get a vote.
Zephyr, wasn't it also a second package of amendments, poison amendments, that would have weakened what actual just causes would be?
Yeah. Well, and those are the other 15 amendments. Things like just piling on different what we call fault grounds for good cause eviction. So it wouldn't be enough, for instance, in the bill as drafted to have it be that there's a substantial violation of the lease that becomes good cause. It's that also, the tenant was harassing people. The tenant was verbally abusing staff. The tenant was in one of the amendments, which literally made no sense. Like if they'd ever asked Maryland Legal Aid or Public Justice Center or anyone that does this work, does this amendment make sense? They would have known it. But it said effectively, it would be good cause to evict a tenant if they disrupted the landlord's quiet enjoyment of the property. Well, tenants have a right to quiet enjoyment of essentially undisturbed right of possession of their unit. Landlords don't have that. That's not what the law is. So that's just to say, that one was emblematic of other stakeholders, other lobbyists just throwing spaghetti at the wall and actually it ending up in the bill.
Well, and just to be fair, on the issue of a quiet enjoyment, let's assume that a property manager has a right to be treated respectfully and so on. But it's very interesting that when we've seen this a lot, as I'm sure you have, Zephyr, that a property manager who gets told that the rents are too high or why has it taken 2 weeks to fix my refrigerator can then turn around and say that that's harassment, that they're being abused, that the tenant is being a nuisance or unruly, which of course is not true at all when only what they're doing is pursuing their rights.
Yeah, there were some other, I agree with that. And there were some other interesting things that JPR did put, Judicial Proceedings Committee did put into the bill as amendments that kind of softened the blow of it all. They had talked at various points throughout session and even in the final, in that package of amendments about, defining retaliation more broadly to protect tenants from retaliation. But none of that was going to actually soften the blow. It was not going to be the bill that we wanted. It wasn't going to have transparency provisions, which we thought improved the bill compared to 2024. And it was going to have this quid pro quo. So again, I don't want to belabor it. There's going to be plenty of work to do to try to move the political positioning of this bill. I think it is like the fact here going into the interim that there are red lines and we have to figure out collectively, how do you move those lines, whether it's our line or their line. Let me get to some of the other priorities here. So the Tenant Possessions Recovery Act was a bill in its third year And the proposition was this: tenants across the state are not entitled under current law to have the notice of their specific eviction date. In Montgomery County, for instance, the sheriff, not by law, but just by good practice, provides a notice. I think it's like a red notice, but they don't provide the specific date in that notice of eviction. Baltimore City has a local statute that provides a 14-day notice and a 7-day notice, but it's also one of several counties or jurisdictions in the state that also includes a provision called an abandonment provision. So at the time of the eviction, a tenant's belongings become legally abandoned just by virtue of the ordinance. That actually was found to be unconstitutional last summer in a Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals case. So it was really important in the Tenant Possessions Recovery Act to do two things. One, create that standard statewide notice of the actual eviction date. And then secondly, create a 10-day reclamation period, post-eviction period, where a tenant can come back to the property and recover personal items, important things like medicine, medical equipment, vital records, heirlooms, family mementos, and those kinds of things that right now, either they're being trashed because they're legally abandoned, or they're being trashed because they're put in the public right of way and anything can happen to them. This bill passed through the House for the first time. It was in a strong position when it got to Senate JPR, and there, much like with good cause eviction, the committee heard a lot of amendments from our adversaries. They did not bring us to the table when they made certain decisions. So they made decisions. I'll just be really blunt. We had a deal. We had a deal, and then we didn't have a deal. So when we no longer had a deal, we found, okay, not only are they taking out the reclamation period, which is the constitutional solution that the circuit court, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals articulated. Not only are they taking that out because landlords really hate that, but they're also reducing that eviction notice from 14 days to 6 days, and potentially as low as 4 days if a county passes local legislation to create a 4-day notice. Other localities might do as much as 14 days. So that's the range that the bill contemplates. It's sort of 6 is the standard, 4 is the floor, and 14 is the ceiling. So it opens the door for localities to do something better than what the General Assembly did, but it does not answer the constitutional question of, for those counties that have an abandonment provision, what due process protection is there for a tenant before essentially their personal items are seized and destroyed. ACE funding, this bill was pretty simple. There right now, Access to Counsel and Evictions Program, which is what we call our Right to Counsel law, has funding through fiscal year 27. That's the sunset. They'll have to be, a convincing and persuasion of many people to provide more funding. What we wanted in this bill was that they just lift the sunset, no sunset. But what we weren't able to do is convince the legislature to do that in light of the massive budget problem that we have. And so it was somewhat of a minor miracle, I think, that very late, like the last 2 days of session, this bill moved, just extending the funding to FY28. So that's $14 million for the attorneys that are practicing in district court eviction cases in Montgomery and every other county. So overall, that's a really good thing.
Zephyr, Delegate Moon said that he thought that the funding got reduced to $5 million. Do you know anything of this?
That's actually the next one. So let me just close one thought on ACE funding. So part of the bill too is to continue the Access to Counsel and Evictions Task Force. So this is a task force of many stakeholders, And what the bill does now is it require what the law will now require is that the task force include 3 members who are tenants who earn 50% of AMI or less. And the bill allows the task force to compensate those members with a stipend. So that's something for Renters Alliance members to look for when the bill becomes effective. Now, what the 5 million is about is that last year's budget bill ended up with $10 million for eviction prevention funding. So that's emergency rental assistance and other types of assistance to prevent eviction or homelessness. That included $5 million for community schools. This year, DHCD's budget only included $5 million. And there was some advocacy to see if that could be raised to something like 7 million, but it just, there was no traction for that, considering all the other cuts, including to community schools and the blueprint. So it's sad, but as you know, Montgomery County and a couple other counties, there are local efforts to spend money to make those allocations towards eviction prevention when tenants are facing eviction. It's just that there's only 5 million in the state pot. So the last priority here is something that we had not anticipated coming in to the session, and it was these bills that we called squatter bills. Although what they're really trying to do is either remove the wrongful detainer eviction process completely, or just to expedite it dramatically. Wrongful detainer is a kind of eviction process that isn't supposed to be filed against tenants who, by virtue of being a tenant, they've not only entered the property, but they possess the property with a lawful right of possession. That's what their lease provides them. Wrongful detainer is supposed to be brought against someone who never had that kind of right. They may have been invited onto the property as a guest, or they somehow just got into the property. And that's what, many people call a squatter. There's been a lot of news media about squatting. There's been, Donald Trump Jr., what's his face in Florida, Ron DeSantis, a lot of crying and screaming about squatting. And a conservative think tank called ALEC actually has a model bill called the Stop Squatters Act. And they've shuffled that around the country and been able to pass this type of bill, which essentially creates an extrajudicial warrantless eviction. So there's no court process. Someone just writes an affidavit, like an owner says, I own this property. There's a person in it who doesn't own it. I need them out. They give that to the sheriff. The sheriff can then immediately remove that person. There's no need to go to court, and there's no need to have a warrant. And not only was there one bill, Senate Bill 46, to that effect, there were 10 bills overall. So this was like, you saw a weed in January, and then by February, your whole yard was covered in weeds. The final product here is actually not as bad as the extremely constitutionally suspect thing that was being tossed around as though it was normal for most of session. So there is going to be a court process. They're going to keep the wrongful detainer process, but what they're trying to do is put some guardrails on it so that it's quick. What they settled on, and this went to conference committee, where a group of, I think, 8 people from both sides had to come together very last minute and try to find some way to basically reconcile the two different solutions that the House and the Senate had come up with. And what they settled on was that there will be a trial within 10 business days after the filing of this case. There will be different kinds of methods of service of process that have to be accomplished very quickly. A private process server could be used for that, which makes it very different from other eviction cases. And the appeal period will be reduced to 4 days. So this is not nearly as bad as the original bills, which again were going to be constitutional lawsuits left and right if that version of the bill had passed.
Well, just on the surface of it, Zephyr,
Mhm.
what that bill was trying to do was to eliminate due process. So basically, the landlord and the sheriff are judge and jury deciding whether somebody should be in their home or not. All evictions, including wrongful detainer, which is an accusation that somebody's not supposed to be in the home that they say that is their home, require some kind of court action in order to evict somebody. And so that's a due process. Zephyr, there was like you've handled cases where people are being sued for wrongful detainer, but are there in good faith, believing that it is their home.
That's right. I mean, there's certainly a scam out there that homeowners are wary of, where someone moves into the property and pretends to be the owner or pretends to be a landlord. That also hurts people who really do think that they're renting. They've paid a security deposit. They've paid a couple months rent to someone who was an imposter. They were induced by fraud to do that. And what the Stop Squatters version of this legislation was going to do was just punish those people just as though they were as bad as the person committing the fraud. But you know, all the legal services organizations testified about the fact that there are renters who might have an oral lease, or they're renters who had a lease with a prior property manager who did not provide a copy of their lease to the new property manager, and they're sort of vulnerable then to being misconstrued as squatters when in fact they're just paying rent to live in a place. There are other people who are going to be affected by this and could still be negatively affected even under this more moderate version of the bill, which are people who, you know, maybe they're in tax sale. Maybe they think they still have an opportunity to save their home from tax sale foreclosure. But there's a tax like a lien purchaser who's now going into district court very easily and speedily, suggesting that actually that person who has lived there for, let's say, like 15 years as the owner is actually a squatter. You know, so you have to have guardrails. You have to have due process. That's exactly what it's about. This was an attempt to just get around things like the right to counsel, rental licensing, and all those types of things.
Well, we've
So
got another 10 minutes, Zephyr, if you could
yeah,
whip through the failures.
I will. So the Fair Chance in Housing Act was a bill in its second year, essentially to give people with a criminal history a fair shot to rent in this market, and that bill failed. There's a lot of reasons for that, mostly because on both sides, Senate and House, people got cold feet about talking about people with a criminal record on the floor of the House and Senate. There was a bill on source of income discrimination and a loophole, which is allowing, I wouldn't say allow, I guess is a loophole that's being used to deny voucher holders an opportunity to live in apartments using their voucher by testing them or screening them based on income multipliers, rent to income ratios, credit scores, adverse credit history. And this bill would have disallowed all of those, closed all those loopholes, so that we have an actual source of income discrimination prohibition. That bill that bill was not going to go forward in the way that advocates wanted it to, so it didn't move. Fair housing testers, that bill did not. That bill passed the Senate, did not move in the House for the second year in a row. There was a bill to codify disparate impact fair housing law from federal law. So there's HUD guidance, there's DOJ guidance, there's case law and in federal jurisprudence that talks about tenants' remedy for discrimination that is occurring without intent. So it's about the impact. And that bill passed the House, did not pass in the Senate. I think the fear is that that federal fair housing disparate impact theory might be rolled back by the current administration in Washington. So this was an attempt to get out ahead of that. You may be familiar with the AI rent fixing situation, the lawsuits in DC and Maryland and several other jurisdictions across the United States. This bill would have prohibited the use of software, AI software or programs that use private rental data from companies is like not available publicly, and then use that to set prices among all those companies. So that didn't move. The unhoused individual rights bill, a very important bill. There were a lot of amendments to this, but it eventually it didn't move anywhere. This was an answer, this like a Maryland answer to the Supreme Court case from last summer, Grants Pass, which criminalized or allows criminalization of unhoused people for their life-sustaining activities in public and in public rights of way. So this would have said, you know, under the Maryland Constitution or Declaration of Rights, that type of criminalization would be prohibited. A couple highlights. There is a bill that passed that will require landlords to provide at least 24 hours written notice whenever they're going to enter, unless there's an emergency. The mold.
Zephyr, if I
yeah.
may interrupt on that one, we
Mhm.
we have always had that in Montgomery County. Was that not across the state?
Correct. That was in the county, but nowhere else. And it's a sad thing that such a basic provision was so necessary in many jurisdictions. The Mold Protection Act was also something that, you know, had been worked on for several years. Then there was a hiatus for 2 years. This came back and passed. So what it does is it provides that landlords will have 15 days to assess, which is another word for inspect a complaint of mold, and then they have 45 days to remediate the mold. If they cannot do it in 45 days because it's not feasible, then they have to complete that remediation within a quote reasonable time. The rest of that bill is to require Maryland Department of Environment and a couple other state agencies to devise uniform standards for mold identification, assessment, and remediation. And those would be due July 1st, 2027. So overall, I mean, it's not the strongest thing in terms of how tenants face mold hazards, but it's a really good start. One of the only affordable housing bills meaningful affordable housing bills that passed this year is the Affordable Housing Pilot Expansion Act. That's payment in lieu of taxes. So this is going to allow more counties to basically make deals with developers who will promise that at least 25% of the units in their development will be affordable rental dwellings. And the definition of affordable here is 60% AMI or less. And that's so that the developers, they wouldn't have to pay property taxes. They'd pay just some lump sum fee. And generally a good idea, but it didn't include any tenant protection. So like when you look at things like the low-income housing tax credit, when those are used, then the tenants in those properties, those financed properties, have stronger protections than just market tenants. So what's next? There are some bill signing dates coming up. We hope that some of these tenant rights bills will be featured so that folks can get their photos with the governor. But just a couple other thoughts here. So I mentioned with the Tenant Possessions Recovery Act that there's still a constitutional problem in Maryland. So one thing to look for is whether there will be more litigation like that Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals case, and whether there will be county legislatures like Montgomery County's legislature that might go ahead, absent a lawsuit, to pass a reclamation period, something like 10 days that was in House Bill 767. Housing discrimination, I think that this was kind of low key a really bad year for the Maryland General Assembly in fighting for fair housing. And we're going to see with the crumbling of HUD and the lack of funding to enforce fair housing at a national level, we're going to see just how important it is over the next year, not only to fund enforcement of fair housing, but to do some of the challenging things that the state didn't do this year, which is to further protect tenants from source of income discrimination and other discrimination against tenants or tenant applicants who have a criminal history. Good cause eviction, whoops. We know that's going to continue to be a big conversation because of those lines in the sand that we talked about. Local housing production, I think, is the big talking point. It's like the buzz all across the political spectrum right now. But we're also entering a recession, most likely. I know there's news about tariffs today that I haven't even watched the news today. But in all likelihood, there's not going to be housing production that's starting anytime soon in the robust way that legislators are talking about as being like really real. And this just gets to my last point, which is there's quite a buzz too going on right now in the past couple weeks with books. For instance, Ezra Klein's new book. The guy from the Atlantic, I'm forgetting his name right now. Also
Goldberg?
another book. Sorry?
Goldberg, the editor?
No. This is a different guy. But basically, I apologize for forgetting all their names. But these are what's being called the abundance liberals, and their whole thesis is that things like housing production, transportation, healthcare are all areas where the United States needs massive improvement. We all agree on that. But that the problem is progressive policies. So the problem is us. And this dovetails perfectly with all the adversaries who killed not just good cause, but are also trying to kill vacancy control, rent stabilization, and will come for basically all regulations of landlords. And that was really, at the end of the session, that's what we were hearing the most. We were just hearing, we can't, as a developer community or as a investor community, we cannot continue to be regulated this way. This was brought up I'll just say this was even brought up with the air conditioning bill, which I didn't go into that one because you all have an air conditioning law in Montgomery County. But yeah, new construction and renovated buildings should have air conditioning.
Mhm.
That shouldn't be controversial. But for affordable housing folks who are coming to lobby in Annapolis, that was a big deal. Mold was a
Well,
big deal.
what
Eviction also was a big deal. So
what
I'll
I-
end there, Matt, and I'll
Yes.
take any questions.
Thanks. We've got one more minute, so hopefully there won't be any questions. But first of all, thank you very much for this presentation. It's a great overview. I will say that this conversation is the beginning of the next conversation we're facing next year. We are emboldened as ever. The gauntlet has been thrown. I will say that our adversaries have been clear about what they're interested in, and certainly profits, and are at the top of that list. But we're also going into an election year. And so elected officials will need to listen to this large constituency that is very supportive of these pieces of legislation and are very frustrated and angry that they did not make the progress that they should have, especially given how broad the support was among organizations, elected officials, counties, and municipalities across the state. So the positive side, as I said, I think to a reporter earlier this week, that people have to keep in mind that we've been at this for almost 2 decades. And when we first started this, people laughed in our faces. Now, at least, there's a conversation and there's general support for these programs. And we have a bottleneck in the Senate, in particular in Maryland. And they're going to need to listen to their constituency if they want to continue to be senators in the state of Maryland. So listen, Zephyr Shaw, you're an expert. Brilliant expert on housing policy and the law. We're so grateful for your work and service. And we hope to have you back again. And of course, we'll be working with you along the way as we begin to strategize next year. Final word, we have another town hall coming up on April 23rd, where we will have the head of the Housing Opportunities Commission, Chelsea Andrews, and her staff to discuss the impact on the limited support for HUD on local vouchers that support our most vulnerable renters. So with that, I want to thank again our panelists, Majority Leader David Moon, Zephyr Shaw for his expertise and support, and of course all of our staff for joining us tonight, and all of you for listening in. This broadcast will be on YouTube as well if you missed anything, so you can watch it there. But with that, thank you all and good night.